I was thinking about and talking about with my wife the withering fig tree parable, which I believe is Mark chapter 11 and Matthew 21, I think. Matthew 21, 18 maybe, and Mark 11, 12, I think. And I was talking about how Jesus, from a long way away, sees the fig tree, and it looks really good from far away. It's got like a lot of nice leaves. He's like, oh, good fig tree. And then when he gets up close, there's no fruit on it. So he curses the fig tree, and it just withers and dies. In Matthew, pretty sure in Matthew it just happens instantly, but in Mark he curses it, and then they come back the next day and it's withered. And in between, he curses directly, and then on the way back the fig tree is withered. So in Mark, the casting out the money changers is inserted in the middle of the withering fig tree parable. But basically what I was thinking about is he knows that forward in time, it's never going to bear any fruit. It's not a good fig tree. Like, it looks good from far away at first glance, but it's not. Upon closer examination, it's never going to bear any fruit. So he withers the fig tree and just kills it and gets rid of it, which is like a line of thought. So the fig tree that he withers is an unproductive line of thought that you see is never going to bear fruit or be useful or productive in any way, which mirrors the synaptic pathways in the brain. Like, certain lines of thought, trees of thought, synaptic pathways in the brain are not fruitful. They're never going to be productive. I'm not going to tell you what they are because you're smart, but things, lines of thought that are unproductive, unfruitful, you cut them off and just let them wither with your choice to basically select that thought, pick that line of thought or not. And if they're not fruitful, you just curse that tree, that synaptic pathway. You let it wither and die out. And that led me on to thinking about the line of thought, the single line of thought which exists within, you could say, a body of thought or a body of work. Like, if you think about an individual, an artist or a scientist or whatever they are, they have like a single line of thought, which is like one idea of theirs, and you would consider that within their entire body of ideas, their body of work. So it's like a branch on a bigger branch, like a tree. And then you have that line of thought inside a body of thought, inside a school of thought. Like, you could think of it in like physics. There's different schools of thought in any discipline, every art, or even in religions. Like, there's different denominations of the same religion, which are different, broader, like different schools of thought. So you have certain lines of thought within bodies of thought, within schools of thought. And then those would be branches within what you could maybe like a paradigm of thought. Like within our civilization of the two most obvious ones would be like a materialist reductionist paradigm, purely physical reductionist atheist materialist paradigm, and a spiritual religious paradigm, which is a bigger branch. So you have all these, like, they're stacking up like the branches on a tree. And then you have these two, or whatever more, I'll just call it two, like our spiritual, current religious versus materialist paradigms, which exist within a civilization of thought. Which you could think of as like in a previous age, like now, our civilization, like a Western civilization, versus Eastern civilization. Like, we have certain paradigms, even though they seem vastly different to us, of like a materialist versus a spiritual, religious, whatever paradigm existing within our civilization. But then we have like our Western civilization juxtaposed with like the Eastern civilization, or like, just make things simple, you could just say like Chinese. Like, and you could imagine that, like, as different as like an American religious person's viewpoint versus an atheist materialist viewpoint, they're still closer together than like most Americans and Easterners, or like a native Chinese person. Chinese man, I'm sorry. So it's like the civilization of thought exists within a larger age of thought, where our Western civilization and like the modern Chinese Eastern civilization still exist within the same age of thought. We're existing in the same age in the world. Which is to say, like, in a previous age, you would also have more than one coincident civilizations. Like, maybe in a past age, you might have like the Mayan civilization and the Roman civilization. You could call it a kingdom or whatever. But you can imagine that as different as those two are, the Mayan civilization and Roman, or empires or whatever, they're still closer than they would be to us, and we would have more in common with the current Eastern civilization because we exist within the same age, whereas those civilizations exist in a different age, which is like a different age of thought. So you go up all these branches on the tree, from a single line of thought to a body of thought to a school of thought to a paradigm of thought, which exists within a civilization of thought, which exists within an age of thought. And these ages exist within a world of thought. And they're all like the fig tree. You start with an unproductive, and you work your way up as things are no longer bearing fruit. They're not useful anymore. Where Jesus says, they're like, wow, you withered that fig tree. And right after that he says, Um, you can, if you have the belief, you can take up a whole mountain and tell it to cast itself into a sea, which the mountain represents the world. Like when it would say like, come to the mountain of God, that's like coming into a different world, like a spiritual world as opposed to the material world. So starting with casting or withering the fig tree and ending up with casting the whole mountain is like throwing the whole world away once it's outlived its usefulness. That world is basically the material world, or at least this iteration of the world, which is why the casting out of the money changers in the temple in Mark is seated. Once we learned our lesson from this world, it'll be taught. And when I say learned our lesson, that doesn't necessarily mean like oh, that's why this world is. See, God made this for us to learn. It doesn't necessarily mean it was made once we've learned. Would be like saying that a hot stove burner, you put it there specifically for your kid to burn his hand on, you know, which is not true. You didn't have a hot burner on your stove. You can't micromanage. Eventually end up fucking around and getting burned and learning their. Not what you want wasn't like specifically for them to burn their hand. Because of our thoughts and the world would be completely different for you because of what you believed. Heart is made up of thoughts, which all accrete down on the floor. All these fragments accrete as the material world, which is really just made up of all these different fragments piled up here. And that's also, you could say, well, no, the material world is the material world, but I think it's always good to look at like insane people. I'll enjoy watching videos of just legitimately insane people, or people like really whacked on drugs. Or you can go insane yourself if you like to, if you don't have any pressing responsibilities. But you can be like, the material world is material, this is the world. But ask someone, like watch someone, an insane person talking. They'll be like, oh, and then they grabbed me on the street, and they grabbed me on the street, and they took me into the hole and took me down the elevator like 1,000,000 floors into the center of the earth, and then they brought me back up in the middle of the street. It was the Ratbag. They opened it up, and millions of rats came out of the Ratbag. Imagine how many rats. And on some level, you're like, wow, this person is completely insane. But on another level, well, at least me personally, I'm like, preaching to the choir, bud. Like, oh, we all know about the Ratbag. I said, who you telling? I know all about the Ratbag. But on another level, you're like, that is not reality. But you can talk to an insane person whose thoughts and beliefs have veered way off the consensus, that are not living in the same reality as you. Period. That you can observe people firsthand that are experiencing a completely different reality than you, and it can be just someone from a foreign place that differently from you, and it can go up incrementally, like I was saying, like a line of thought, a body of thought, a school of thought. It can go up all these levels. There are people that are might have some psychotic break, which I don't necessarily even mean in a derogatory way. I just mean they have veered way off of consensus to where they're like, I was living in ancient Roman times. Like, yeah, that can happen if you veer that far off the synaptic pathway of like the world computer, the world brain. And beyond that, like, there are people, well, I'll just say we can imagine it's possible to veer off so far that since everything is made of our thoughts, that is like what establishes our reality. You could veer so far off that you go beyond the civilization and age into another world. But once you go a certain distance away from the flock, like the consensus of reality, since they're all made of thoughts, we can relate to people who diverge a certain amount because we still have certain amounts of beliefs and thoughts in common that are overlapping. It becomes harder and harder to understand the less overlap there is and the further away they diverge, to where if someone goes that far back up the tree to where they're going into a different age or age or world, once you go far enough away, there is no common thoughts or beliefs, there can't really be any meaningful. You're not even going to know what they're talking about. Like, you can't, going that far away can't really be described because we communicate all in this like web of self-reference analogy. Like, all language is analogy. This is like this thing. Like, red is like the first time you saw red and something else red. Oh, that's red. Like, once you go so far away and we don't have any concepts in common anymore, there's no way to really talk about it. So there's at this stage, there's not really any point in talking about other worlds, other than like there are other worlds. And another idea I have was it's kind of, but going up that synaptic tree, plotting a new path, like something you can do is being an explorer, where it's kind of like being in the middle of the ocean with like an island chain, where if you just go way out in the middle of nowhere, you're too far out to have any communication with the rest of the flock, and you don't have any useful to anyone. But you could, if you go out and find like a foothold, which is an island, you can make your way back, and you can make your way back to like the larger groups of humanity and be like, hey, there's an island up here, I'm gonna be up there, like, if you want to find me, come up there, I'll be that way, which is like leading a flock. And rather than just flying off blindly across the ocean, you do this kind of like island exploration, island hopping, leading the flock, and in that way you can cross the ocean safely, or like chart a path across the ocean. Anyway, yeah, I'm gonna hang it up, I think. Hopefully I can make a real video sometime soon. I haven't had a chance to do that. Yeah, the main idea is the parable of withering the fig tree is a line of thought, an unproductive thought. Whatever is not, if you project it out into the future, it's never going to bear fruit. You know that. You already know what those lines of thought are. But you have to examine them also by straining them through your brain. Maybe that's one more thing I'll do. It's like the wine press analogy of squeezing the spirit through the wine press, and you can find all these old like religious imagery where the cross is like the wine press, like pressing Jesus down, and he's treading the grapes. And in the old wine press where it's like carved into stone, they would have the thorns would be like the filter. Like they would like mash up all these thorns together. It'd be like a big pool up top where you mash the grapes, and it would run down through a little funnel spout into a lower pool. So the wine, grape juice all accumulates in the bottom pool, and all the grape bodies and skins, the flesh of the grape, stays up top in the first pool. And they would use thorns, like weave all these thorns together and put them in the spout as a filter. So that's like the crown of thorns in like examining ideas or working through the mind to see what is fruitful, is kind of this like agonizing process of filtering everything through the thorns, the crown of thorns, like to find the essence of it, like the spirit of it, of what you're supposed to learn and what will be fruitful long term. Yeah, the parable of the fig tree, wither the fig tree, line of thought, body of thought, school of thought, paradigm of thought, civilization or kingdom of thought, age of thought, the whole world of thought. Whole world of thoughts. The